Okay, good evening. Welcome to Parsha Shiur, Parshas Va'era. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. I don't know if we'll have time, it's late already, but let's try and see how much we can do. But the main theme of this week's Parsha is, of course, the Makkos. In Parshas Va'era, we have 7 of the 10 Makkos, and I came across a very beautiful Golker. The Golker makes reference to what we are familiar with from Seder night, because he talks about the 10 Makkos, and we know that on Seder night we make reference to it in the Haggadah, that the Makkos are divided into 3 groups. I put on the sheet, Tatzach, Adash, and Bachav. 3, 3, and 4. And the Golker has got a very beautiful mahalach in explaining what these 3 groupings are all about. And as ever, there's a lot more going on sort of behind the scenes. So let's go through the Golker. It's quite a long piece, but I'll try and break it up, and it's certainly worth the effort. Says the Golker. This is in Shmois Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Koi Omar Hashem, bezois teida ki ani Hashem. Loshen zeh ne'emar b'makkah rishona shel tzeder datzach. This is the introductory pasuk of the first 3 Makkos, datzach, dam tzfadei kinim. Koi Omar Hashem, bezois teida ki ani Hashem. Through this you will know that I am Hashem. That's number 1. V'chein, b'makkah rishona shel tzeder adash, and in the opening pasuk of the next group of 3, adash, Oroiv, Deva, and Shchin, ne'emar leman teida ki ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz. The pasuk says that you should know ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz, amongst the people, amongst the land. V'chein b'makkah rishona shel tzeder ba'achov. And then, in the first pasuk of the last grouping, Ba'achav, Barod, Arbe, Choshech, and Becheres, Makkos Becheres, Ne'ema ba'avur teida ki ein kamoini b'chol ha'aretz. So you've got 3 different psukim introducing the 3 different groups of Makkos. Now, says the Golker, Gam haBarbanel nisoira al zeh. The Abarbanel also picks up on this, a different pasuk introducing the 3 groups. Or Pirush, and his explanation of it is Sheparo hayachelek al shlosh dvarim, because Paro theologically denied 3 aspects. Ha'echad, the first was Metzias Hashem, the very existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem Yisbarach, ki kichesh b'Hashem, he denied the very existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'yomer lo hu v'lo yadati es Hashem. Now the pasuk says, I don't know who he is, I deny him. Al kein nema b'makkah rishona bezois teida ki ani Hashem. So the function, the objective of the first 3 Makkos was to show Paro that I exist. Now, Hashniya, the second theological issue, if you like, was Shoyacholek Loma. He argued and said, Im timtzalem sheyesh Eloka b'nimtza. Let's say there is a God, says Paro. Mikol makom eina mashkiach b'shvelim. He's not particularly interested in what's going on in this world. Al zeh ne'emar, on that, the pasuk says, Ki ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz. I am Hashem b'kerev haaretz. I actually do know what's going on in this world. Hashlishis hu, and the third sort of theological denial of Paro was shayacholek al yacheles Hashem. He was denying the ability of HaKadosh Baruch Hu loymar she'einu yochel l'shamnes hateva klal, that he can't change the rules of nature. Al zeh ne'emar ki ein kamoini b'chol haaretz. There is no one like me in the whole world. Kloma yochel lifal kacheftzei, i.e. he can actually do and he can change nature. So that is the Abarbanel's pshat in the 3 psukim, introducing the 3 stages, the 3 groupings of the Makkos. Number 1, denial of Hashem. Number 2, not aware of what's going on. And number 3, unable to involve himself in this world. V'oima ani, says the Golker, Lahaisif bir advar. I want to add to his explanation. Lahachnis kol sholosh Makkos tachas sug echad. To explain this theme in reference to each of the Makkos in that group. Because the first 3 Makkos, dam tzfadei kinim, they come to prove the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the Mitzrayim would say, the Nile is our God. Ein oid milvadoi. There's nothing else but the Nile. Al kein osa Hashem shvatim be'eloheihem. Therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu judged and punished their God, the Nile, that there is a God over and above your Nile. Through this you will know that I exist, in reference to the Makkah of Dam. Next paragraph. Uve'inyan hatzfardim, and in reference to the frogs, shesharat hayur, that came out of the river, of the Nile, hoyre shegam hayur yishrot devarim ha'ma'amitim mitzias Hashem, Yisparach, because even that will authenticate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki Paro hoye mechal Hashem v'omar lo yadati es Hashem. Paro was blaspheming and saying, I don't know who this God is. Al kein hodia hayar ki roy lekadosh Hashem. Therefore, the very river testified that actually you don't know who he is, but you should actually be Mekadosh Hashem. You've got to sanctify him. Ki hatzfardim kitru Hashem berabim. They publicly sanctified Hashem. K'de'isa, like the Gemara says in Pesachim and Gimel and Beis, shechananya mishal v'azari mosru nafshem al kiddush Hashem. They gave over their lives al kiddush Hashem, and how did they know to do that? V'lomdu kal v'choyim me'atzfardim she'olum be'tanurim, because the frogs went into the ovens, they were moist nefesh, and they learned from there the importance of being Mekadosh Hashem. Like the Medrash says that those that went in the oven never actually died. Okay. Over kinim, and with the next one with lice, nemar etzba lokimhi. That the actual Egyptians said, "This is the hand of God." They also sort of coronated God. And the admission of the protagonists is like actual testimony. So you see, says the Golker, like the Abarbanel says, the first three comes to counter Paro's claim that there is no God, and therefore it says, so it explains the Golker, and that is really the theme, if you like, of the first three makkos. Dam tzvadei akinim all point to the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Good. That's the first group. Next paragraph. I'm about halfway through this box. V'seida adash, and when it comes to the grouping of the next three, Orov deveshchin, nirmaz, this hints, ki hu yisporach mashkiach lemata b'chol pratioishim. As the Barbanel explains, this goes to the second theological denial of Paro, that God doesn't know what's going on in this world. So the next three, each of the makkos prove to the contrary. Because they say, God is involved in the big picture. He's not involved in the detail sort of between various people, between various locations. It's not in the detail. It's all one big chulin. There'll be a volcano which will apply to everybody. There'll be a flood which affects everyone. Everyone is caught up in it. That's why the Makkah of Orev addresses that. I differentiate between those who live in Eretz Goshen, Asher Ami Omi, that my people are standing on, Levilti Hayos Shamar, there won't be any Orev. So you see, V'zem Moifes Choytech Sheyesh Hevdel Ben Tzadik L'Rasha. That's demonstrating that Kodesh Baruch Hu is aware and can differentiate about what's going on in this world. That there'll be Orev over here, but not over here. Uva Shakadosh Baruch Hu Mashkiach Al Kol Prateo Ishim. He's in the detail. That's what the pasuk is saying. My divine providence is also on the lower realms. And so too the next makkah, with wild animals, with the pestilence, with the plague on the animals. HaKadosh Baruch Hu differentiated between the animals of the Mitzrayim and those of the Israel. It's again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is demonstrating that he can differentiate, he can know the difference in the detail. And lastly, the third of the second set, with boils, this dust went over the whole of Mitzrayim, and yet there's a distinction between Mitzrayim and Israel. So you see in the second set of the three makkos 4, 5, and 6, in the makkos of Adash, of Orev, Deva, and Shchin, there's a demonstration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu knowing the details of what's going on in this world in terms of location, in terms of people, etc., etc. Now, what about the last three? This is very interesting. Beseid de Ba'achov, in the last four makkos, Borod, Arbe, Choshech, and Makkos Becheres, Pirish HaBarbanel, Sheba'u la'ames yecholes Hashem Yisbarach. It's coming to show the ability of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Velinir, and it appears to me, says the Kli Yakar, she Paroi ta'on shtei reshuyos heim. Paroi said, there are two deities, there are two gods. Al kein nema b'maka rishona al seder ba'achov leman teida ki ein kamoini b'chol haaretz. Therefore, the introduction of this last set, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, there is no one else, there is no one like me in this whole world. There's no other deity like you think, Paro. What's he referring to? He's referring to the zodiac of the sheep, which is their god, V'Hashemesh, and the sun. Therefore, last paragraph, amazing. The last four makas, therefore, emasculating or reducing the ability or frustrating the deity which Paro thinks exists, i.e., the mazolos, the muzzle of the tle, the sun. How so? This is what the Kli Yakar says. Ki beredes haborod, because when the hail came down, mistomah hashemayim miskadrim ba'ovin, it was getting darker with clouds. Ad shelo yochlu liros hashemesh kol zman yiridus haborod. When it was hailing, you probably couldn't see the sun, right? Like a regular day in England. Of a makas ha'arbe ksiv vayakem es ein haaretz. When it was arbe, locusts, it says vayake, it says ein haaretz. You couldn't see; it was covering the whole ground, the whole land. That means that it was covering up the sun. That's why it was dark. And certainly in the Makkah of Choshech, and so too Makkah's Bechoros, which took place in the middle of the night. That all refers to the Makkah of, to the claim of Paro, who says that there is another deity, there is the sun, there is the tle. So fine. So we do this in the middle of the night where there's no sun, and I'll show you that I actually can control. Or we do this we produce a makkah called choshech, which is going to show you that I can actually overpower your sun. There's no one like me. That's what Kodesh Baruch Hu is saying. Because this is makas bechoros, which is a way of subduing the muzzle of tle, bechor lechol hamazos, who is the bechor for all of the mazolas. It's the first of all the zodiac signs. So a very, very interesting Kli Yakar, again explaining that the categorization of Datzach, Adash, and Bachav, which we famously refer to on Seder night, according to Abarbanel, refers to the three denials of Paro. Number one, there is no God. Number two, he doesn't know what's going on. Number three, he's unable to interfere. That's the Abarbanel's take, and therefore the three psukim exactly address those points. But the Kli Yakar explains how each of the makkas in each of the groups come to address the denials of Paro. So a very important and a very interesting Kli Yakar. Okay, let's press on. Next piece. This is a very interesting observation which I saw in the writings of Rabbi Yaakov Bender, quoting the Mashgiach of Matisyahu Salomon. I thought it was appropriate to say some Torah in Matisyahu's name. Nebuch, he passed away last week, and I don't know if the shiva is finished, but possibly still finished, maybe not even finished. So it's appropriate to mention some Divrei Torah, and then the Matisyahu would share. So this is a fascinating observation of Matisyahu. The Pasuk says in this week's Parsha, Vayom Hashem al Moshe, Emor el Aharon kach matchov v'netei yodcha al meimei Mitzrayim. Says the Pasuk that Hashem says to Moshe, tell Aaron, take your staff, your stick, v'netei yodcha al meimei Mitzrayim, and you, Aaron, you hit the waters of Mitzrayim, you hit the Nile, to change that water into dam. That was the first of the 10 makas. And Rashi says later, on the pasuk in the next parak, in parak ches pasuk yud beis, vayom Hashem Moshe emer el Aaron netes matcha v'hachas afar haaretz v'hoyle kinim. In the third of the makas, when we're going to hit the ground, again, it's not Moshe who does it; it's Aaron who does it. Now, why? So famously, Rashi says, emer el Aaron. Says Rashi, lo hoya ha'ofa kadai lilkos al yedei Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu could not hit the ground. Why? Lefi shehegin olov. Because the ground protected him. Because Because after all, the ground is what saved Moshe Rabbeinu. When he killed the Mitzri, he buried the Mitzri, and therefore he sort of buried the evidence, as it were, and therefore it saved him, and therefore he felt gratitude to the ground, and so to the which saved him when he was a little baby floating down the Nile. So therefore, Loka al Yidei Aaron, it was Aaron HaKohen who did it. Says Ramat Yov, a very, very interesting insight which I never thought about. So, therefore Moshe Rabbeinu showed gratitude, he himself didn't do it. When he buried the Mitzri in the earth, how long was that successful for? How long did it really, was it Megan, did it protect Moshe Rabbeinu? You know how long for? One night. Did I write that?
Yeah.
One night. Cheating. One night. Why? Because the Pasuk says, but we discussed it last week, the next day, the Pasuk says, he went out to his brothers and he saw and then he was informed upon. So for one night, the whole thing was one night. And that's the degree of gratitude you've got to have, that you can't even hit the ground sometime later. And it's, by the way, a long time later. We discussed it last week. The missing years of Moshe Rabbeinu, we're talking 60 plus years later. He was a young man, the Ramban says between 12 and 20, the Yalkut says 18. He's now 80 years old. So this is 60 plus years later. And 60 years later, you hit the Mitzri in the ground, and for one night it saved you, and you've got a debt of gratitude. Says Ramat Yov, yeah, absolutely. If the ground could make sure that you slept comfortably, or more comfortably, for one night, that deserves a debt of gratitude. That is how powerful Hakaras HaTov is. And I came across, maybe you've read this as well, it's quite well known, that last week was Rav Dessler's yahrzeit. I think it was 60 years, or I think it was a significant yahrzeit. So Rav Dessler here from, we were very proud of his English connections. So he was here for many, many years during the 1930s and 40s, founded the Gates at Koilel, etc., etc. Now, interestingly, the story is told of Rav Dessler that he was, because of the turmoil of the Second World War, his son was learning in yeshiva in Europe and managed, when the war broke out, and managed to go to Shanghai and eventually through Siberia and to Shanghai, and then he managed to make his way to America. He went and he finally settled in Cleveland. So Rav Dessler had a ben Yochid called Nochem Zev Dessler, a very successful mechanech in America, but he was apart from his father, Rav Dessler, for I think 7 years, in his formative years. And Rav Dessler wasn't able to see him until 1947, so many years later. And eventually they managed to get together, and he was a very emotional person, Rav Dessler. You see the letters he wrote. And when he was reunited with his son, as part of the conversation, he said, when you were lonely here, growing up in America, who looked after you? Who helped you? So Reb Nochem Zev Dessler told his father that Blazer Silva of Cincinnati, one of the famous personalities of 20th century America, he was the one who really helped me. So Reb Dessler says, okay, so we need to thank him. So the son thought that Reb Dessler will pick up a phone and we'll call Cincinnati and we'll thank Reb Blazer Silva. They said, no, we're going in person. He says, but Daddy, it's 9.5 hours by train. He says, okay, yeah, I understand. They went 9.5 hours by train, overnight. They were standing outside of Blazer Silva's house early in the morning, waiting for him to come out of his house to go to Shachris in Cincinnati. They couldn't say Shalom Aleichem, couldn't meet, but they went with him to shul. He invited them, of course, back for breakfast. They sat at breakfast, and he thanked him very much for looking after his son, for his kindness. And then Blazer Silva kept asking, so how can I help you? What are you here for? No, I just came to say thank you. He couldn't believe it. 9.5 hours each way to say thank you. But that's a Bal Musa like Rav Dessler. The debt of Hakaras HaTov is so great that that's what Reb Blazer Silva observed in Rav Dessler. Okay, I think we're out of time. It's late already. All right, Emes Hashem, the next idea we'll have to revisit on a future occasion, Emes Hashem. Okay, Beseder.